Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. Welcome to another amazing installment of the Richard Watkins Podcast. It doesn't matter whether or not you are a morning bird or a night owl. I'm simply excited that you are here with us today for another amazing installment of the Richard Watkins Podcast. I am your humble host, Dr. Richard Watkins, and the Richard Watkins Podcast is a proud production of the Science Policy Action Network, the premier research, consulting, and engagement firm. Find out more about the Science Policy Action Network at span-inc.org. That is span-inc.org. Now, with that out of the way, let's get the proceedings proceeding because we have an amazing episode. We are going to discuss some really, really cool topics. One of the first things I really wanted to touch on here is I was watching a documentary of late. And in the documentary, they were following a group of monkeys, right? Now, this group of monkeys has a very strict hierarchy, right? And by hierarchy, I mean where you are in regards to that monkey society, right? What rung on the sociological ladder do you find yourself? Now, this has been documented through a lot of different observations in many, many different primates, right? This strict and rigid social hierarchy, right? There's monkeys that live in cold weather, and whether or not you are high up on the monkey social economic ladder, it depends on whether or not you get to dip and bathe in the hot springs and be warm when the weather is cold. And if you are not an important monkey, you will find yourself shivering in the cold. No one cares about you. Now, in the documentary, they had a group of monkeys, and depending on who your parents were, you could be treated like royalty, eating all of the great food, the best of the best, and treated well, or you could be treated terribly, eating the worst food. If a tree begins to develop fruit, you may find yourself not eating the fruit from the tree, but the fruit that fell on the ground. It might be rotting, but that is all you got. Not only would you not get the best food, but you also may be subjected to ridicule. You may also be picked on by every other monkey that outranks you. And not just other monkeys your same age. If you are a child monkey, if you are a young monkey, you may be picked on by older adult monkeys. And that really begs the question about this concept of strict social structures, and then also this kind of concept of bullying, right? What is bullying? Is what we see with these monkeys a form of bullying? Or is it something else? Is bullying something that is part of being a primate, part of being human, which is what I'm really going at? But that's not at all where I'm going at specifically. Because some could look at a bully and feel that they are just being a bully because that is part of authority. right? Being able to exert your will and dominate something or someone else. That's a sign of power. But is it really a sign of power? Is power simply just exerting your will over something else? Or is it something more? We bring up power just to talk about something else. We bring up power to talk about what should power be used for. Now, in the case of the monkeys, with power comes access to better food, better living standards. And it could be the case that that power is utilized to bully or to keep other monkeys in their place. And that might have some evolutionary benefit to doing that. Who knows? Who knows? But in several examples, the most powerful, the most senior, or the highest ranking monkey sometimes begins to care for the lowest ranking monkey. See, that's interesting right there because it would be so much easier for a monkey with power. It would be so much easier for a monkey with resources. It would be so much easier for a monkey that is experiencing an embarrassment of riches to simply just enjoy their life. And in fact, in many cases, that's exactly what they do. And in many cases, they go through some lengths or great lengths in order to pick on or bully or to make sure the societal structure remains intact. But in some cases, the top monkey takes care of the bottom monkey. The most powerful monkey takes care of the weakest monkey. The most senior monkey takes care of the youngest monkey. And it's not just monkeys, this happens sometimes in chimp communities. Chimpanzees, one of the great apes. Now, I don't know exactly why this happens. Those who study primates and great apes, they might have some ideas as to why it happens, but as an observer, I I feel that that display of a monkey who is powerful, a chimp who is powerful, who is senior, who is dominant, who has resources available to it, resources in abundance, for that monkey, for that chimp to then reach down to the very lowest of the monkeys, the very lowest of the chimp, and to then take care of that chimpanzee, to take care of that monkey, disrupting social norms. I feel that that is the most powerful monkey of all. I believe that might be the most powerful chimpanzee of all. Because not only is that chimpanzee dominant in the established social order, but it is so dominant that it is willing to disrupt social norms to care for the least of these. See, I believe that there might be levels to it, right? Levels to power, levels to authority, right? There's some authority and some power that you can have, but it's not enough to disrupt the way that things are done. But you can become so powerful and so great that you can then begin to disrupt the way that things are done. Now, you can disrupt things in a wide variety of ways. You can disrupt things in terrible ways. You can disrupt the social order of things that allow the weakest, that allow the people with the least to suffer more and you to gain more. Power can be used that way as well. But see, I would argue that power is part of this concept that is so near and dear called leadership. See, in the case of the monkeys and the chimpanzees, the monkey or the chimpanzee that is the most powerful, the monkey or the chimpanzee that has the most resources, or has through you know, dis you know, display when a monkey displays strength, when a chimpanzee exhibits physical prowess, right, through fights or through other demonstrations or through being courageous, right, then that monkey becomes the most powerful, that chimp becomes the most powerful, the dominant, the leader, right? But it is the case that leadership isn't just about being the most powerful monkey. Leadership is not just about being the most dominant chimp. Leadership is about caring and protecting and providing for all of those in your community. And obviously, the more powerful of a leader you are, the more you're able to protect and provide for your community. And it is an extraordinary display of power and leadership if you as a leader are able to break out of what it is expected of you to care for the least of these in your community. Now, you can be charismatic, you can be rich, you can be intelligent. But if you are not able to care for the least of these, if you're not able to, what's the best way to explain this? All right, here's an example. And we're going to use another animal for example. So originally we used the concept of monkeys and chimpanzees, but let's shift to a different mammal. Let's pick the lion. Okay. Now, the lion is symbolic, right? The lion in many cultures and in many people's personal view is a symbol for power, might, and leadership, specifically the male lion, with the big mane. Now, please look this up. Um, but lions are just really interesting, right? Now, it has been assumed that only the lionesses hunt, but all the lions hunt, right? So male lions hunt, female lions hunt, lionesses, they all hunt. Now, it is the case that often the lionesses are engaged in a lot of the hunting. That is true. And it is true that when the lionesses take down their prey, that the entire family, the entire pride come to that fresh kill and then they begin to eat. Now, it is sometimes observed, and actually many times it is observed, that the male lion, they come and then they begin to eat. Now, it doesn't matter who was in that, in eating first. When the male lion comes, it is the biggest of the pride often, that the other lions just move out the way and let it eat. Now, some people could look at that and say, "See, that's leadership. That's being in power. That's like, yeah, you're gonna eat first. Blah blah blah. It doesn't matter who's in your way. You're gonna eat. You're gonna dominate." And then other people could look at that and criticize. That lion didn't participate in the hunt, so why then would that lion be allowed to eat first, to eat its fill, leave, and those that participated in the hunt, and then the smallest and the youngest of the pride, why are they left to eat what is remaining? That can't be right. That's not leadership. And I think it's fair to look at it from both ways. But another interesting way to look at it is in the observance of how many dominant male lions meet their end. Now, male lions, when they get to a certain age, they are chased off from the pride. They spend several years outside of a pride, with so oftentimes other groups of male lions just hunting and hanging out. I believe a group of male lions might be called like a conglomerate. I'm not sure. I think that's the case, right? And then at a certain age, the male lion that has been out on its own for a very long time, they then find another pride. That other pride will have a dominant male lion there. And that lion that has come to age will then go to that pride and then challenge the dominant male of that pride. And oftentimes, that situation, that confrontation between the new male lion trying to take over that pride and the male lion that is the leader or the dominant male of that pride, oftentimes that conflict leads to death. And so it is the case that the leader, the male lion, the dominant male lion of the pride, meets its end in defense of the pride, in defense of the lionesses and the pride, in defense of his offspring, in defense of the pride itself. So it could be the case that the pride has no issue with the lion, the leader, the male lion, having its fill first at the fresh kill, simply because they know that lion is willing to die protecting them. See, that's the trade-off. That's the trade-off. The pride is okay with the male lion, the leader of the pride, eating its fill, even though he did not participate in the hunt at all, because when it comes down to it, he is willing to die to protect them. See, that's one interpretation of leadership, right? Leadership, having the trust of the people that you lead, so much so that they are willing to provide you grace, because when it comes down to it, they know that you are willing to sacrifice something for their benefit, something real. Sacrifice isn't something that is easily given, right? Right. And sacrifice isn't a loss either. It is something that hurts and is given willingly. See, that's leadership, right? I used to tell my students all the time that not everyone in a leadership position is a leader, and you don't have to have a leadership position to be a leader. Again, you make your own definitions, working definitions of what you feel a leader is. But given those natural examples of animals that live within a strict social hierarchy, and those examples of dominance, power, and leadership, you can see how I've developed my definition of leadership. It's not just about being smart, it's not just about being good looking, it is not just about being charismatic. It is about being willing to sacrifice. It is about caring for those that you lead. As I've heard somebody say, it is not about being in charge, it is about being responsible for those in your charge. It is not easy. It is not easy at all. And as the public speaker Simon Sinek said, being a leader is not fun. It is about accepting all the responsibility and giving away all the credit. It's not easy. And I think ultimately that's what makes a leader. Now, there's different ways you can lead, right? But just in my estimation, that is what being a leader is all about. Now, I think it's interesting that I'm here talking about leadership. We're exploring conversations of sociology. This is really a sociological conversation. And it is the case that, my background is in psychology, my minor is in sociology, right? But I think one of the things that we have to all come to grips with is, why should you even listen to what I'm saying? Now, you could look up the things I'm saying and find it to be absolutely true. I encourage you to look up every example that I gave you. Look up how I've defined leadership. Look up how I explore the sociological dynamics of lions. Look up how I've talked about the monkeys. I believe it's macaques. And look up how I've discussed the chimpanzees. Now, chimpanzees is a primate. They live in very different societal structures than other primates, such as the orangutan or the gorilla. But look it up. Now, if it's true, does that make me an expert? And if I am not an expert, should you listen to me? Should you only listen to experts? If you get information from somebody who's not an expert, what should you do with it? Is it useful? If it's useful, should you share that information with other people? Can experts be wrong? Which brings us to another question. Oftentimes, we hear that we are experiencing the death of expertise. It's kind of complicated. Like, so we live currently, now, I don't know, you could debate this, but I would say currently we live in the most informed civilization in all of human history. I know we beat ourselves up all the time. I think that has a lot to do with nostalgia. Like things were better back in the day. Back in my day, we used to know X, Y, and Z. Okay. I would argue that we live not only in the most informed civilization, but obviously we live in the most informed time of all of human history. Nearly all of human knowledge is available to us, like in our pockets, at our fingertips. But confusion, distrust, and division appear to be increasing rather than decreasing. Now, I don't know if that's true, right? I don't know if distrust is higher now than it has ever been. I don't know if division is deeper now than it's ever been. That's just what people say. It's hard, right? I don't know if the appropriate comparisons have been made, and if they have been made, I don't know if the data has been analyzed and interpreted in all its ways, or if the pitfalls and caveats have been explored. I don't know for sure, but it is said to be the case. But really, what is at that question of expertise? What is an expert? What is an expert? And is an expert more of an expert if they've been an expert for a long time? Who defines what an expert is? Now, I think collectively there are institutions that say who is and who is not an expert. That's the whole point of diplomas and being said to be a professional by accredited institutions of higher learning. But does it mean that those are the only people who know? And does it mean those are the only people you should listen to? It's very difficult. And I think that is why it might be very hard to believe different things. And also, there's that realization that experts can be leveraged to promote certain ideas, certain narratives. It's very complicated. And I know that people feel like they might have solutions to what they would call a death of expertise, but I really don't know. I really don't know. Remember, and we can still see this now, that often, all right, for example, I and you may have heard people on television talking about SARS-CoV-2. We recently did an episode on viruses, so I just brought that up. I'm a virologist myself, right? So I guess I'm an expert on viruses. But when I watch the news, regardless of what outlet, it really didn't matter. And I would have somebody talking about the pandemic. I would oftentimes see physicians talking about the pandemic. I would sometimes see pediatricians, which is a physician specifically for children, talking about the pandemic. I even once saw an anesthesiologist discussing the pandemic. But I actually very rarely, and I actually want to say never, but I'm not completely sure. Maybe I saw one, but I never saw a virologist talking about the pandemic. I very rarely saw an immunologist talking about the pandemic or even talking about the rollout of vaccines. And I wondered why that was the case. I actually still don't have the answer. But it makes you question what is expertise and what is the value of expertise? Why is expertise needed? Is expertise even needed? Or do you just simply need the smartest of your society tackling different challenges? Can someone who goes to school for one subject then develop a career in a completely different area? Like, when does somebody become an expert? Right. So I studied HIV. Was I an expert only when I was given the diploma? Or was I an expert after I defended my dissertation? Am I an expert in all of viruses or just the virus that I did my dissertation on? I think that's a hard thing. And I think it's an important thing to really talk about because experts occupy certain spaces in our society and they are given authority. And that oftentimes is very that's oftentimes is very problematic, right? That's oftentimes very problematic of not knowing exactly when someone is an expert and when someone is not an expert. Now, one of the pushbacks is oftentimes culturally, we as a society cherish and celebrate those who aren't experts, right? We have a deep societal tradition of celebrating the common person, right? It's part of humility, it is part of togetherness. And oftentimes experts are outside or set apart. And we oftentimes have a certain dilemma with dealing with that, right? Especially if they are displaying an expertise that grants them certain access and certain authorities that we just can't get. And so oftentimes there's a pushback against that. And we oftentimes, when we are sharing ideas with someone else, our ideas are validated by our perceived expertise. You have heard this in debates. You hear one person debating another person, and the debate is over ideas. When one person engaged in a debate feels the need to explain to the other person that they are debating with that their expertise alone is why they are right and why they should win that argument, right? They're arguing about, for instance, football. One person says this player is better, another person says this player is better, and they're arguing, arguing, arguing. And then one person was like, I played football, right? Or, somebody's arguing about different societal issues, and one person said, I've studied this. Now, winning an argument is one thing, being right is a completely different thing, right? And we'll go into this some other time. Maybe I should go into it now. I don't know. But one of the individuals that is credited with science as we know it, or the father of the scientific method, is an individual known as Francis Bacon. Now, most people just know Francis Bacon as someone who developed the scientific method. But many people don't understand that Francis Bacon had several different professions, right? Francis Bacon was a politician, right? Francis Bacon was involved in so many different scandals. And Francis Bacon is also an individual who developed a scientific method who many people didn't feel was even a scientist. Go figure. Now, a lot of people, again, just focus on the scientific method. And again, I just said there's a lot of different things about Francis Bacon that are overlooked. Another thing that are overlooked about Francis Bacon are these concepts known as idols of the mind. Now, Francis Bacon described these things as aspects of human nature that prevent, okay, the pursuit or acquisition of a certain truth about a certain thing, okay? Now I'm going to mix these all up. Actually, let me just look at it let me just pull it up. I can just pull it up for you right here. All right, let's see. Francis Bacon. Let's see what it gives me. Idols of the mind. Real time. We're going to see exactly what we come up with here. All right. So I'm just going to read it as it is. So if it's not perfect how it comes out, charge it to my mind and not my heart. All right. So Francis Bacon, right, he argued that human beings are like systematically distorted in the way we think about things, right? In other words, the human is not naturally objective, right? We're subjective, right? And there are a lot of different things that feed into that, right? And he called these distortions idols of the mind. Okay. Now these idols are essentially, now I'm reading here, right? Essentially cognitive biases. So cognitive means how you're thinking, right? Thought biases, cognitive biases, mental distortions, the way your mind changes things, right? We discussed sensation and perception on a previous episode. So through your senses, you're pulling in information, but your mind interprets that information. Your mind is then able to distort that information, it has a lot of power. Right. So mental distortions, habitual errors in human reasoning. Right. So just the way we go about reasoning has in it innate flaws that oftentimes we don't even recognize and continue to perpetuate. And it makes it very difficult for us to assess anything from an objective standpoint, right? We're never outside of ourselves. We're always looking at things in a subjective way because we are only able to look at things through our own self, right? Now, Bacon believed that these things are called idols, and he believed that they prevented humans, everybody, from arriving at true knowledge. Keep in mind, Francis Bacon is like a politician, right? He's this ancient politician. Well, not ancient, but like he's this politician, right? He's not like a psychologist. So just keep this all in mind because we're talking about expertise, right? The person who invented the scientific method was not actually a scientist, right? I'm not even sure he used the scientific method to decide whether or not the scientific method itself was the best tool to explore or to find truths, right? And here are the four idols. There's idols of the tribe, idols of the cave, idols of the marketplace, and idols of the theater, right? So we'll do it one more time. Idols of the tribe, idols of the cave, idols of the marketplace, and four, idols of the theater. And we're going to break those all down here. Like, I didn't know we were going to go into this, but since we were talking about expertise, I just felt like there was no better way to really uh, talk about this without talking about this. And I'm not trying to make these conversations easy, right? Because nothing is easy. And I'm never going to really try to approach things and really simplify things, right? Because there are so many people who are like only trust experts, but if we really start thinking about how what knowledge is and what truth is, yeah, we should listen to experts, absolutely, right? But it's more complicated than that because there's more that goes into it than that, and we're going to talk about that here, right? So, idols of the tribe. These are errors that arise simply because we are human. Okay. Just being ourselves prevents us from finding the truth about something, acquiring knowledge, right? Like just being human. Now, the core idea is that human beings naturally see patterns when no pattern exists, right? We look for patterns. It helps us predict, it gives us confidence that we know what can happen in the future, and when in fact we have no idea what will happen in the future. But it's important for us from a psychological standpoint to be able to step into tomorrow, right? It's really, really important. So we see patterns where none exist. We favor emotionally satisfying explanations, right? We are emotional. And I know a lot of people, when they communicate just with X's and O's, dollars and cents, ones and twos, right? But we actually crave emotionally satisfying explanations, right? Which is why oration is so important. Because if you are able to make someone feel something, then that idea is more likely to stick. I'm going to say that one more time. If you are able to make someone feel something, then that idea that you were trying to communicate is more likely to stick because we favor emotionally satisfying explanation, right? Now, we project meaning onto randomness, right? We do that now. It's related to seeing patterns when there are none, right? Things are random. We project meaning onto it. We all do it. Like this happens, so it means that I should be doing this, or this happens, so that means that I'm doing the right thing, or this happens, so that means that I'm doing the wrong thing. We have a tendency to do that, right? And then we interpret reality through human limitations, right? So we have our own limits, but we define reality based on our limits, right? Our senses. What is real is only what we can perceive it to be real. Now, obviously, this connects directly to egocentrism, right? Meaning that everything comes from inside of us, right? Misinformation, tribalism, conspiracy thinking, right? So it's really important, right? So those are idols of the tribe, and those are things that just us being human, okay? You can look at it and be like, oh, that's dumb. Only dumb people that we all do it to some extent. It is just part of who we are, okay? So understanding who we are, that's the first way we can kind of deal with those things. He next went into idols of the cave. Now, these are distortions created by the individual, not just about being human, but just being yourself, right? So it's not just being a human, it's about being yourself. So in my case, me being Richard, for someone else, it's about being, Jasmine or Brittany, right? It's just about that, right? So you look at things and you interpret them solely through your own upbringing, through your personality, experiences, or ideology, right? That shapes how you pursue knowledge, the questions that you ask, your interpretation. That comes from your upbringing, personality, experiences, and ideology. Now, just really keep in mind, these are all things that are interfering with your ability to find a particular truth about something. These are all things that make it harder to do those things, right? And they shape and how you interpret reality, right? Now, every single person lives inside this type of psychological cave. Again, it's idols of the cave, right? Now, we don't merely see the world as it is. We see the world as we are. Okay? We're not seeing the world truly as it is. We're seeing the world as we are. That's so important, right? Because just because we feel something to be true does not mean that it is true. And just because we interpret something, it doesn't mean that that interpretation is correct, right? It's all influenced by the fact that we are humans. So this is something that affects everybody. And then it also is because you are unique to yourself, right? You have your dispositions, you have your upbringing, right? You have your own ideology, right? That comes from your upbringing, but it also your own. And it all interferes and blurs your ability to pursue a particular truth. Okay. And the next one is idols of the marketplace. This is really about language. Again, I I knew that I needed to cover this because when we were talking about arguing and debating, right? First off, you have to realize that the person that won the argument is not necessarily the correct person. It is oftentimes, and we've talked about this in other episodes, it's oftentimes just the person who's better able to articulate their ideas and then able to get the most people aligned with the way they think about something or the way that they communicate a thought. And that is oftentimes why that someone says, hey, I've studied this, or hey, I've played this. That is a powerful tool because to the audience listening, it is their cue to place more weight on what that person is saying. It is not necessarily the case that that person is right, but it is then a cue for the audience or the listeners to begin to place weight on that particular thing. So Bacon believed that words themselves, anybody ever been in an argument knows this, right? Words themselves often distort thought, oversimplify complexity, and manipulate understanding. Words are powerful. You oftentimes hear comedians saying, oh, they're just jokes, or oh, he's just talking, or oh. Nah, words are powerful. Again, if you've ever been in an argument, I'm talking about an argument with someone you love, right? I'm talking about if you're in a relationship, you got a girlfriend, right? Or you're arguing with your children, or you're arguing with your colleague. You know what I'm talking about here, right? Words distort thought, oversimplify complexity, and then manipulate understanding, right? So if I say something to you, it immediately changes the way you're thinking about something. If you hear it, it changes the way we think about something. It oversimplifies the complexity. The world is a complicated place. And everyone who talks, especially your favorite person that you like to hear speak, what they are doing, if you like it, they are either aligning with what you already believe, or they're able to articulate something that's complex in a simplified way to make you think that the world fits into these buckets of understanding, and quite frankly, it never does. That's not how reality is. Even I just did it right then. It never does, right? That's an oversimplification because sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't. It's a mix, right? Whatever. And it manipulates understanding, right? The better that I'm able to say something, like me constantly checking in, right? That word, right? It brings you back in, right? Even if you don't understand what I'm saying, me saying right, it changes your perception of your own understanding, almost to the extent where you want to say, yeah, right, even though you don't know what I'm saying. You ever been in an audience and the lecturer or the preacher says a kind of like a check-in, like right or amen, and you say right or nod your head or say amen back, even though at that particular moment you weren't even paying attention? It manipulates your understanding on everything, right? Now, I'm not saying that there's going to be brainwashed, right? You can come in with your own thoughts, but if you listen to someone speak, language has the power to manipulate understanding, right? So I actually stress everyone, no matter where you are, as far as your oratory abilities, pursue improvement. That's all I want to say. All right. So, language can clarify reality, but it can also imprison thoughts. Okay. All right. Last but not least, idols of the theater. The theater. All right. So we've got the tribe, we've got the cave, we've got the marketplace, and now we have the theater. Okay. Now these are false systems of belief inherited from society. Say that one more time. These are false systems of belief inherited by society. Okay. Now, Bacon compared them to theatrical performances, right? Convincing, emotionally compelling, but artificial, right? Examples today might include rigid ideologies, blind institutional loyalty, or unquestioned dogma. Okay. So we talked about this before. Is this related to the Plato's allegory of the cave? We've covered that in another episode, but here they're describing it as a theater, like what you were like perceiving to be real and fact is not, right? They are manifestations of society, right? They are placed upon you and you follow them like institutions or whatever. You follow them and they can, not always, but they can mislead you, right? So the key question is, how many beliefs do we hold because we examine them, and how many because we inherited them? Woo! I gotta say that one more time because that hit hard. Like again, I'm just reading this. I didn't know it was gonna come up. Okay. So let's say it one more time. How many beliefs do we hold because we examined them? And how many because we inherited them? Think. Think about that. That we personally examined them. We came to those beliefs on our own. And how many did we inherit? Through our religion, through our culture, through traditions, through our society, through our nation. How many? I don't have the answer. I'm just asking a question and you can think about it. It's very interesting to think about because the more you think about it, the more you start to question, the more you start to wonder. And trust me, it's not simple. It's never simple. It's always complicated, more complicated than we are comfortable with accepting. Again, we just try to find something that makes us feel good emotionally, right? So that's just really, really important. So today, I hope to have muddied the waters in regards to how we think about power, how we think about leadership, how we think about expertise, right? And again, we touched on Francis Bacon. And again, one of the biggest reasons that I brought up Francis Bacon when talking, sorry, I brought up Francis Bacon when talking about expertise is because he wasn't a scientist, yet and still we use the scientific method, and scientists all over the world credit him with being the father of the scientific method itself. But the question is he a scientific expert? I don't know. But I hope that you ask that question yourself. So again, today we discuss power, leadership, and expertise, hopefully in a way that provokes thought and provokes conversation. Hopefully, when you get into that barber chair or you hear this episode and you go out to dinner, hopefully you can talk about some of these concepts. And maybe you might come to an answer. I have no idea. I just have questions. And it ends up being the case that the more I learn, the more I realize how little I know. My name is Dr. Richard Watkins. This has been another amazing episode of the Richard Watkins Podcast. Remember, the Richard Watkins Podcast is a proud production of the Science Policy Action Network, the leader in consulting, research, and engagement. Find out more about the Science Policy Action Network or SPAN at span-inc.org. But most importantly, remember that the future is not something to wait for, but it is something to build. Until next time, take care.